Amazing. Okay, so for those of us who have been here now the past two times, you might be familiar with this pitch already, but this Parsha class is an opportunity to be looking at the Parsha that maybe we're familiar with, but hopefully looking at it with a whole new lens because we're going to be using passages from the Talmud in order to get there. So there's lots we could do for Parsha Lecha. I want to do a story that might feel a little bit random, like a story that we don't usually think about when we think about Lecha. But I will say that this particular connection to the Gemara that I found is actually what prompted the idea of this whole class altogether. Like way back in the beginning is when I first made this connection. I went, this could be a very interesting mode of study. So I'm personally invested in it. It's like a little bit, I would say it's like a little bit more far-fetched on the previous ones that we had, where we had like looking at the story of Migdal Bavel and then seeing explicitly how it comes up in Masechet Avodah Zarah, or even the one with Breshi and Ketubah that we did at the beginning. But I hope you bear with me and enjoy. So I'm going to send our source sheet in the chat. I'm going to share my screen as I usually do. And as usual, participation is always welcomed. And yeah, let's get started. Okay, let me find the Parsha for me. Okay, fantastic. Great. All right, you're gonna get to see all of my tabs. You'll be like a little bit scared, but that's fine. All right. Okay, here we are. So today the story that I want to do is a story that is about Avraham, which makes sense because we are starting the stories of Avraham and his nephew Lot. I want to orient ourselves into where Lot is in Avraham's life, and then see this very unusual story that happens in chapter 14 of Genesis, in which there are these kings that are fighting, and it almost seems like Avraham is a side character in the whole story. It's a very odd chapter, and we're going to read a good chunk of it today. But if you ever, in your spare time, just want to see something that like maybe you didn't encounter in your own day school experience, I recommend checking it out. But it's this fight between a set of 4 kings and then a set of 5 kings. And then Avraham gets kind of looped into it all because Lot gets taken captive. So that's where I want to start us off today, and then show you a very interesting parallel in Masechet Sanhedrin. So the first source that we have is a source that shows us a bit about where Lot ends up, because I think that's important for where we're going. In chapter 13 of Breshi, Avraham's shepherds and Lot's shepherds are fighting, and the solution is for them to have different sets of land after they've come to the land of Canaan. And when they're trying to figure out how to split things up, Lot has different ideas about where he's going to go. So I'm going to start reading from, I'm going to read the Hebrew and then the English just to get us there. In chapter 13, Perek Gimel, Vayisa Lot et einav vayar et kol kikar hayarden ki chula mashke lifnei shachit Adonai et stom et amora kigan Adonai ke'eretz Mitzrayim bo'achat tzoar. So Lot looks up his eyes, and he sees this whole plain of the Jordan, and that there's a lot of great planting opportunity there. And also it's like a funny anecdote within the text itself. It says, don't worry, this is before Sodom and Gomorrah get destroyed. That's going to be happening in next week's Parsha. But in case you weren't sure about the chronology, that is going to be happening later. All the way to the land of Tzoar. It looks like a garden of God. Maybe this will see some kind of allusion almost to the Garden of Eden, which is fascinating, trying to think about like good and bad, because Sodom and Gomorrah don't turn out to be so good. And it looks like the land of Egypt, which you also don't really associate with being good in a Jewish context. So that's all the descriptions that Lot has for this place. Vayivchar lo Lot et kol kikar hayarden, vayisa Lot mikedem, vayipardu Ishmael achiv. So Lot says, okay, that's great. I want good land for my pasture. And so he takes that whole plain of the Jordan. He travels from east, and he separates from Avraham. Avraham yashav be'eretz Canaan, ve'lo yashav be'arei ha'kikar ve'yehal ad Sodom. So we are left with them being in separate places. Avraham is sitting in the land of Canaan. Lot is sitting in the cities on the plain of the Jordan, and pitching tents all the way to Sodom. So that is affirming for us that Lot is with Sodom and how that happened. And now we'll get to the more dramatic part of the story that with the kings that I was mentioning. Sorry, also, that's a lot of reading of the text in advance. So we will get to our discussion. So hang on tight. Okay, so now we're in chapter 14. We get introduced to these sets of 4 kings and then 5 kings. And there's a lot of fighting. And so that's where we're going to pick up. So it says, Vemek hasidim be'erot chemar vayanusu melech stom va'amora vayiplu shama v'anisharim heranasu. So in this fighting of the 4 and the 5 kings, in the valley of Sidim, there were all of these bitumen pits, I guess like a kind of well. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, who were some of these kings in that group, they were not doing so well. They had to run away, and they threw themselves into these pits while everyone else escaped. So they're not doing so great in this war. And the other kings took all of the possessions of Sodom and Amorah and all of their food and ran away. So not really leaving them in good potential for surviving. So they take Lot captive and all of his possessions. And just in case we needed a reminder, he is the son of the brother of Avram, so his nephew. And they go, and he resided in Sodom. So reminding us why he kind of got lumped into this mess is because he chose to live in Sodom in the first place. So then we have a quick frame shift, like you imagine like a movie, that now a refugee from that camp is now going to Avram and telling him what happened. Vayavo hapalit vayagei Avram ha'ivri v'hu shochen be'elonei mamrei ha'emori achi eshkol v'achi einar v'heim ba'alei brit Avram. So the refugee goes. He tells Avram what happened, and tells us where Avram was living in Elonei Mamre, which is the terebinth, a kind of tree of Mamre. Okay, and all these other people, Eshkol, Inar, and they were all, I guess, like in some kind of partnership with Mamre. Vayishma Avram ki nishba achiv vayarek et chanichav yelidei veito shmona asar u'shlosh meot vayirdof ad Dan. So Avram says, "This is my nephew. I need to go take care of him." And he hears that he was taken captive. He gets all of his the young people in his house, like all of the servants, 318 of them, and go chase him all the way to Dan to go get Lot. So they split up. It's nighttime. Him and his servants, they actually are quite successful. They chase, they kill, all the way to Chova, which was to the left of Damascus. Okay, so all this back and forth fighting war. Vayashev et kol rechush v'gam et Lot achiv u'rechusho eshiv v'gam et hanashim v'etam. And great, he got back all the possessions. He also got Lot back, and all of the possessions, the women and the rest of the nation. Vayitzei melech Sodom likrato acharei shuvo mehakot et kedar laomer v'et hamelachim asher ito amek shevehu emek hamelech. And so the king of Sodom is so happy that Avram came to save the day. He goes to greet him after he kills all these other kings who have very funny names like Kedar Laomer. And they go back to this valley of Shaveh, that is the valley of the king. So basically, to summarize that long story, in this fight of the kings, Melech Sodom and is not doing so well, the king of Sodom, and all of the possessions of Sodom get taken, including capturing and kidnapping people, such as Lot. Avram hears about this, is very distressed, and feels the need to go save him. And actually, he's the one who makes sure that the rest of Sodom is successful. And the king of Sodom is going to greet him and thank him for that. Then in the story, there's an amazing interlude of this man that we don't know named Melchizedek. And he shows up and blesses Avraham and teaches him all these names of God that he didn't know before. That happens. And then we pivot back to the story of the king of Sodom coming to greet Avram. And we see that Avram gets very angry. And that's where that's going to be the last bit of Tanakh sources we're going to go through today. We'll have a little discussion, and then we'll see what the actual Gemara does with it. So going back to our story, Vayomer Melech Sodom el Avram, Tenli et hanefesh ve'rachush kachlach. So Melech Sodom says, great, let's make a deal. Avram, you give me all the people that we took captive, and you get to keep all the possessions. Vayomer Avram el Melech Sodom, harimoti yadi el Adonai Eloyon konei shamayim va'aretz, And Avram says to the king of Sodom, I swear to God, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. This is the fancy, lofty term that Melchizedek had taught him about how to call God. And then Avram says, I will not take so much as a thread or a sandal strap of what is yours. So as in, no matter the size, even something so insignificant, seemingly insignificant and tiny, I will not do it, because there is no way that I would like for the king of Sodom to say, it is I who made, to get credit for saying, it is I who made Avram rich. There's no way that Avram wants to take all of these things and feel thankful to the king of Sodom for that. He says, only the food that's already been taken by these soldiers, that'll count, and then some things for the people who are in my covenant, but otherwise we refuse to take anything from you or thanks to you, Melech Sodom. And that's the end of the story. So there's a lot of different details to unpack here, not our usual way of thinking about Avram. We usually, I would imagine him like in a tent, and then now he's like top warrior, and he's having all these debates with the kings about like what to take and what not to take. And I'm curious if any of you have any thoughts about why do we think Avram feels so strongly about one, like particular taking the booty that was taken, like ultimately, is it even a kind of stealing? It could be a great like ethics of war question, like maybe it's all available for the take anyway, so why wouldn't Avram want to take it? And then two, why is he feeling so strongly against the king of Sodom to think that God forbid that anyone would think that Melech Sodom did anything to make Avram's life better? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Yeah, Barry, go for it.
Hi. Well said. This is a great chapter. Or chapters. I think Avram has already been promised by God from the beginning and forward of the beginning of Lech Lecha, that leave your father, leave your homeland, get out of there, come to the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great name. I will make you wealthy. I will make your descendants, numerous, and they'll I forgot if it says it here or not. They'll take the possession of the gates of your enemies. Everybody will be blessed by you. That comes somewhere along the way, but God promises him, and I think Avram knows enough not to want to interfere with that. And all the credit that Avram, for all the credit that is now and should come yet, is all credit to God for the promises that God made Avram, and not remotely allowed to, not even a crack in the stone, that the king of Sodom should be able to say anything about that. And God backs his word, obviously. So I think Avram is just, he knows the hand that feeds him. He knows where his bread is buttered. Call it what you will. He's a loyal, staunch, God-fearing person. He walks in God's ways. We already see that back in Noach walked along with. There was a statement about Noach, God going before Noach. Now we have Abraham going in God's ways. Abraham is going. He doesn't need this. He doesn't need to lean on God. Abraham is the loyal servant. So he's already survived the fire of Nimrod. He's there. I think he's as strong as I am. I hope I sound this way. He's as strong as I am, and it's all God, and that's it. Don't even dream, King of Sodom, that you're going to ever be contributing to my wealth.
Yeah, right. Like, it's important to remember that this is early on in the covenant, like you're saying, and we better make sure that we know where these things are coming from. And also, there's a lot of warnings throughout the Torah of making sure that just because you become rich and wealthy, like not to forget where things come from. So maybe Avram is already feeling very strongly about that.
And then there's the obvious evil aspect of Sodom, which we haven't been quite introduced yet. But I think Avram wants to distance himself from even remotely being friendly with that. I think
Right.
Avram wants to just make it clear that he's in it for getting Lot back, everybody else goes back to Sodom, and all you do is compensate Aner, Eshkol, and Mamre, and that's
Very
it.
pragmatic.
Leave me
Yeah,
out of it. Yeah.
totally. Yeah, I think we know as readers or or people who know a little bit where the story is going and like the
Yeah.
cultural context of Sodom and Amorah, we know that these are not necessarily people who are good news. And it is true that like when understanding Torah, that we are supposed to be thinking, Rashi says famously, "Ein mukdam le'ochar b'Torah." There's no, there's no clear chronological understanding of things in Torah. So things that like we learn after the fact, maybe we're supposed to know before. We don't know how bad Sodom is about to become. Technically, we're reading the Torah from like front to back,
Yeah.
but we are supposed to kind of know in advance. And I'm hoping that's definitely what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm going to be providing a different kind of hint of maybe why Sodom is bad. That's where we're going to go. Does anyone else have anything they want to share before we continue? Yes, Nathan. Hello.
I don't have can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
I don't have a suggestion to this particular question, which I never thought about. And I like your answer, Barry. But I am reminded, I'm reminded of like the story of the Cave of the Patriarchs. And Abraham is also very insistent on like paying the full amount and, not getting any deal on it. So this seems to be a theme in his life of like, making sure that everything is done in the right manner and that, he's making his money himself and paying full dues. Yeah, I don't know what to make of it, but it just came to mind.
Yeah, as much as in the news stereotypes about Jews and money, it seems to be that from the get-go, Avram really wants to be careful about what we are owed and what we owe others, which is nice. Yeah. I think that's a really interesting character trait of his. Yeah, also, Marilyn. Yeah. Oh, yes, Marilyn, would you like to speak?
Yes. Were the people of Sodom idol worshippers? I mean, that would be one reason that Avram wouldn't want to get close to them.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different midrashim about like what exactly was going on in Sodom and Amorah, and idol worship is definitely up there. I think that the question is like how would Avram have known yet? And had he gone to like visit Lot on a family trip and kind of saw that things were bad news? Is it possible that like in the text we don't actually see that, but like it seems to be already if Lot is separating himself from the person who's receiving the covenant, that like that's not necessarily so great. But yeah, that would make sense to me that maybe that's what's happening. And Ruth wrote in the chat to compliment what Nathan was saying is there's a sense of internal moral compass. That's a pretty good way to start off the covenant of the Jews. I'm pretty pro of that. Nathan, do you have something else to say?
Yeah, just also like, is this even the king of Sodom's stuff? Like, wasn't Abraham the one who sort of fought it? And it's kind of his by default. Right. Like the whole thing is just, it is I who made Abraham rich. Like it's not like he didn't get any of these spoils at all. So what is this claim even? Like Abraham he's even more of a reason to take it. He earned it himself.
Right. That's a very funny point. It's like one is like, saying, is it moral not to take booty? But then also then Melstone's like, oh, you can take my stuff. It's okay. And it's like, wow, where did that come from? That's a really good point. And maybe that also could be like the hint to us on a shot, as like a literary reading of like, wow, there's something kind of off about him. I think that's a great point. Amazing. Okay. That's really great.
Spoils of war existed at this point, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to go to a Talmudic sugya that might not necessarily feel connected, but I think that there's very interesting usage of a term that I've highlighted, but then we'll get to it in particular. But you might feel like we're coming out of like really left field with what we're going to be talking about next. Okay, so the source I want to talk about is from Masechet Sanhedrin. Masechet Sanhedrin is an amazing tractate talking a lot about what the nature of the Sanhedrin, the council of 70 elders in the time of the temple, how it functioned like as a proper Beit Din, as a court of law, majorities, minorities, what things deserve death penalties, other kinds of capital punishment. It's a really great tractate if you're interested in like the meta aspects of legal implementation of the halachic system. Yes. And in the chapter Ben Sorer or Moreh, there's a discussion of the top 3 sins that even if a gun was put to your head, that you have to be able to take the bullet and not perform those sins. And you might be familiar with them. So we're going to start with that and see where it takes us. So I'm going to read in English for simplicity and time's sake. The Gemara now considers which prohibitions are permitted in the times of mortal danger. Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehotzadak, the sages who discussed this issue counted the votes of those assembled and concluded in the upper story of the house of Nitzah, the city of Lod. So basically what they're preambling here is that there's a discussion, a vote of what these important mitzvot were, the ones that even in a time of danger that we, what should we be doing? Should we be doing, if we're told that, do this mitzvah and you'll die, which has happened throughout Jewish history, unfortunately, which ones should we say, no, then we're not going to do the mitzvah, or we're going to do this transgression, and which do not get overridden as such. And the important detail here is why is it they're telling us this weird location about the upper story of the house of Nitzah in the city of Lod, is that was the headquarters during the Bar Kokhba revolt, when the rabbis and all Jews were being discriminated for Torah study and performing mitzvot, that this is where they met in secret to kind of still have these like major halachic decisions in a time of crisis. But you can imagine them all kind of like huddled up in a corner in the attic, having to vote in secret. It's a pretty intense image. So that is where this vote is happening. And it says, with regard to all other transgressions in the Torah, if a person is told, transgress this prohibition and you will not be killed, he may transgress that prohibition and not be killed, because the preserving of his own life overrides all of the Torah prohibitions. So it seems to be that the overall standard is, if you are told that if you do this mitzvah, you will die, or do this sin, or otherwise we will kill you, that there's a real value for human life. And as much as it's horrible to kind of make that decision and that moral calculus, that preserving your own life is the most integral. However, there are 3 exceptions. This is the halacha concerning all prohibitions except for the use of idol worship, forbidden sexual relations, and bloodshed. Concerning those prohibitions, one must allow himself to be killed rather than transgress them. So people might have heard about this as like the 3 cardinal sins of Judaism. And they're avodah zarah, gilui arayot, v'shfichut damim, that if a gun was put to your head and someone said, kill someone else, or otherwise we'll kill you, you're supposed to say, how am I supposed to know my life is more valuable than another person's? And all these other problems, these other transgressions that come up. Obviously incredibly difficult. Like we were talking about this in the theoretical, when like many Jews had to experience this throughout history in reality. And often many Jews decided to not follow this and preserve their own lives. And some of us even here today might be around because people decide to choose otherwise. So it's obviously very complicated. But I think nonetheless that even if the actual practical application is very difficult and problematic, that the value of saying that murder, idol worship, and forbidden sexual relations override the others seems to suggest like a real importance of those 3. I think that there are ways of talking about those being the ones that like affect other people and the harm principle. Like how could you say that your life is better than another's and that you should live over another person? Forbidden sexual relations, obviously complicated, but the idea of like family and continuity, I guess, being something that's important. Idol worship, not worshiping God. I think that one feels pretty foundational to Judaism, so that might be why it's super important. But these are all even during a time when there's mortal danger. However, there's another part of the section that I don't think people talk about as much, which is that even though those are the 3 main cardinal sins, there's another set of stringencies that kick in when we're living in a time of persecution. And that's where I want us to go today. That's the next section. When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said that Rabbi Yochanan said, the sages taught that one is permitted to transgress prohibitions in the face of mortal danger only when it is not a time of religious persecution. But in a time of religious persecution, when the Gentile authorities are trying to force Jews to violate their religion, even if they issued a decree about a minor mitzvah, one must be killed and not transgress. So this is also, again, very intense, and the same kind of, we have to acknowledge the reality of Jews throughout the centuries, and that we often were living in a time of persecution. So like the time of otherwise like feels not so realistic, but it's suggesting here that yes, there are those 3 cardinal sins that if you are told to do them or die, then you're not supposed to do them. But here it's suggesting that even in a time of persecution, doing even a minor action that is against the mitzvot if you're told to do that or die, you're supposed to say, I'm not going to do that mitzvah, and then take the punishment. So I'm curious how, if people have reactions to that, if that's surprising, if that makes sense, what might be the potential logic for saying even a minor mitzvah that one should sacrifice their lives? Like where could that be coming from, even if it sits a little bit uncomfortably with us? Ruth, were you raising your hand?
I was. So
Oh, amazing. Hello.
I wonder if it might be how it would affect your fellow Jews. So if they see you doing something against a minor mitzvah, it could be discouraging to them and help lower their morale. So perhaps it's the overall impact of doing something like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? But even though it might be little, that like the social signaling is huge there. Leah, were you raising your hand?
Yeah, hi, it's Leah. Can you hear me okay?
Hi. Yeah, hello.
It's a really interesting thought that in times of religious persecution, I think it just increases one's obligation to hold on to their faith when they're being forced to renounce their faith, renounce their beliefs. It just increases it so much that even being asked to violate a minor mitzvah, it's just not thinkable anymore.
Yeah, the stakes are higher when, even though it's something that might be tiny, that the potential symbolism of even that one act is huge. Yeah. Oh, Barry, would you like to say something?
I think that you have the two things going in play there that what we're hearing now by Dr. Ruth and Leah are soundly based comments. I think that we also have the concept of even small transgressions, when we've done them, if we don't do tshuva for them, sooner or later they're going to lead on to a bigger transgression. And we have this concept. So it's both individual and collective. It's a message. It's a life behavior to ourselves. If we get away with something up front, we make a transgression. We didn't die for it. What's next? And also, it sends the wrong message to others. And I'm thinking that when in times of, I'm thinking this runs logic counter to my logic. You know, you'd think that I would think that in times of persecution, that's when you need the most lenience, because the persecutor is usually the bully, the bigger gun, the bigger might, and the threat is more imminent on that person, on the person who's being bullied and imposed, and follow their way or no way, but don't follow ours. That's a problem, and I would think logically that would be the time to forgive me. That this is the muscle of this transgression, the muscle of the persecutor is on me, and maybe that's the counter logic becomes that's all the more when we need to stand up as God's children and with our covenant today, because by the time Sanhedrin comes around, we're already living with the Torah. So that's the time when we gotta show it. We gotta live it. And not only that, but we have to take our medicine without praying for a miracle, because you don't. Somewhere along the way, I want to say Danielle, or somewhere in a holy writing, there's the comment about it that you don't go into a dangerous situation with praying for a miracle. You go in willing to risk your life and take your medicine for the sanctification of God, and that becomes the whole story to me. Why the counter logic is no longer counter, but it's logic. That we're there to sanctify God's name, and we've got to do that, especially in tough times, persecution. maybe, and send a clear message to the world and trust God to do what is just and right and gracious and merciful for us, from what God told Moshe on Har Sinai, right? I'll be gracious to whom I am gracious, and I'll be merciful to whom I'm merciful. That's the time when to trust God to do the right thing, and whatever that means to us. So that's where I am.
Yeah, I think you point out like two interesting points there. One is this like almost psychological point of the potential slippery slope or snowballing of like the
Absolutely.
moment we allow one small transgression, what else is next? And then also that there definitely is the gut reaction of, oh my goodness, like I don't want human life to be on the line. And I still think that is like a deep value within the Jewish context. And that also that like if there is like a political game, or even it's a true battle of good and evil, that like that these things, these little actions represent much more, and hopefully in the scheme of things contribute to an overall overcoming of the bully. So I think those are all great points. The question becomes, what actually is a minor transgression or a minor mitzvah? And that's where the connection to our Parsha is going to come. So the rest of the sugya says the following: my mitzvah kala, what exactly is a minor mitzvah that you then, even in a time of persecution, would not be able to transgress? Rav Bar Yitzchak says that Rav says, even to change the strap of a sandal. There was a Jewish custom with regard to sandal straps. If the Gentile authorities were to decree that Jews must change their practice and wear sandal straps like those worn by the Gentiles, one would be obligated to give up his life rather than veer from the accepted custom. So what I thought was very interesting is if you look, we'll go back in a second to Bapar. If you look at Rashi, the way that he explains Arkata de Ma'asna is asro chanal, which is the exact same term that Avram says to Melch Stone when Avram says, I will not be taking anything of the booty. I will not be taking even a string or a strap of a sandal. And that term is a hipax legamanon, which means it only appears once in the entire Tanakh, which means it's pretty special. And therefore, when it's invoked elsewhere, it seems to be an automatic callback to that and saying you have to be remembering that story where it came up once. And so I wonder, and this is what we're going to get to, is what may be the connection between these two things are. So just go back up on the source sheet. I guess if we're still in like the world of this Sugya and Sanhedrin, what maybe is so significant about the strap of the sandal as being that small mitzvah? Like why, first of all, what exactly is the mitzvah? Like it says here that there's a custom, but like what could be so important about shoes and a strap of anything? And what does that say about that being the minor mitzvah? Maybe that feels very extreme. I'm curious what people think about that. Yeah, Ruth.
So, we talk about walking with God, and, a shoe or a sandal is really not a glamorous kind of a thing. But when you're walking with God, like what you're wearing on your feet it has significance. So, even something as lowly as a sandal takes on a different valence.
Totally. I think that's like the scariness, but also I think the beauty of the halachic system overall, right? That halacha could be seen as something that's so overwhelmingly everywhere that like there are rules about absolutely everything. We could find that scary, but that I personally think that is scary if we have only a certain kind of theology that entails like a lot of this idea of reward and punishment about every single action we do. But if instead we see it as that there's like an opportunity to imbue holiness and godliness into every single thing, even in the shoe strap, like that's a really beautiful idea that we have the potential to do that absolutely everywhere. And maybe that's what this is coming to share. Yeah, Barry.
Thank you. Great thought, Dr. Ruth. I am back toward, and in response to that, or along with it, I'm at the point of mundaneness, or whatever the word is. I'm in the mindset of the mundane, that the shoe strap possibly has a reason to hold the shoe on the foot, and a loose or a faulty shoe strap, or a broken one, or a missing one, means that you're walking with discomfort. It's certainly not comfortable, and it could be downright dangerous if you lose your sandal and you're walking on ground barefooted and your foot is tender. and you're subject to stones and chips and whatever else is on the ground, and possibly some as gross stuff like animal feces and whatnot. I mean, it's a gross thought to think of wearing, and especially at these times, going barefoot. So the shoe strap takes on, like that little piece of straw on this camel's back. It's minute, and yet it becomes the cause of a problem. And so that's what I think. The shoe strap could also be very mundane, but very practical. We're less likely to walk the path without the shoe, without the sandal. And the shoe strap sandal strap has everything to do with that, I think, and especially in these times.
Absolutely. It's also holding everything together, right? Like it seems like nothing, but also the shoe could not be the shoe. Right. Exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
Oh, Leah. Yes.
Hi, it's Leah. My thoughts are, if the Gentile authorities think they could change something so mundane as a sandal strap, and they see that people would rather change their sandal straps because they value their lives that much, I think if they went that far and people complied, they would just decide, okay, if we could change a sandal strap, let's change everything else about them.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's a slippery slope.
You've cracked the door open.
Totally. I also have a fun halachic detail in light of the shoe strap that I can share with you. That shows that really you can have like this opportunity for real multivalence, even this little shoe strap. The first time I encountered this is in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. This is like a condensed version of the huge halachic code of the Shulchan Aruch. And it's definitely more on the stringent side. It's like, because this is the nature of codification, the more you code something, the less opportunity for like multiplicity of opinion to arise. And it's something that's very practical and easy to use, but that often means that you lose the nuance in it. So the reason why I say that is because this is something that I usually associate with Frummy people, which again, whatever that means. And if people practice this here, that's obviously like normal and good. I know that from my own practice that like, I never was someone who used this specific halacha, but it's interesting, and it actually is very much about shoe straps or sandal straps. And so what it says is, since we find that the Torah gives deference to the right hand, so then there's this whole discussion of the right hand over the left hand. As someone who's left-handed, I feel very passionate about this topic of why is the right hand always what wins out. So it lists all these different things in which the right hand wins out. For example, with wrapping tefillin, the right hand is like the one that's assumed. You actually wrap differently if you have if you're left-handed. But one of the examples is about tying shoes and how left and right sides being different. And so it says, therefore, when you tie your shoes, you should first tie the left. For example, with shoes that must be tied, put on the right shoe without tying it, and then the left shoe and tie it, and then tie the right shoe. This also applies to other clothing. So it's very pedantic. I don't know so many people who actually do this in practice. There's a discussion about like why if right-handed. Oh, perfect. Sorry, I don't mean to bash your practice, Barry.
That's good.
It's very cool that you do it.
I learned in the Talmud.
Oh, amazing. Wow. We love when we learn things and they're practical in our lives.
Yeah.
I heard also, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Barry, that the reason why we flip it is because we want to confuse the devil in the morning. That the devil always assumes we're going to do the right first as opposed to the left. And so we're flipping it around, and that's the way that which we start our day when we put on our shoes is trying to do that.
I haven't heard that one. Just the tefillin one that you've respected.
Perfect. Yeah. So that's something that we could say like, oh my goodness, like tying shoes, like why should halacha have anything to say about that? And at the same time, to say, oh, even the mundane, the shoelace has the potential for religious action, to see in that empowering sense could be very cool. And then when it's like that, and you think, oh, well, the main authorities, our enemies, are telling us not to do that, it becomes like that's the essence of Judaism, finding the beauty in the absolutely mundane in every single detail of our lives. So it seems like it could be just like a random example, or even bringing in all of these halachot around it could be huge. So I want to leave us with now, before we talk about the bigger takeaway, with the Rashi that we looked at before, to think about, to begin thinking a little bit more about how we could be connecting it overall to the story that we read in the beginning. So Rashi continues, the strap of a sandal strap, For if there was an idolatrous way of tying it, and the way of Israel was different, like a Jewish side to tie on. So they're saying, if you live in a world in which the Jews and the non-Jews tie differently, that it really could be significant. And the way of Israel is to be modest, even with such a difference that is not even a commandment, but more of a tradition. This sanctifies God in front of one's brethren and in public. So this is similar to a few points that people made here of like, that it's an opportunity, that actually it's a microcosm, like what will other people say if I don't tie my shoes that way? It's an opportunity to signal to other Jews. I think maybe Ruth said that earlier. And then to see it almost as a kind of modesty, to think that even the small things have great significance. I think that's very interesting. But Rashi really brings in this term srochnal. But the term that was used in the Gemara was an Aramaic term, arakta de masana. But the term that Rashi uses is srochnal, and it seems clear to me that Rashi, and I think even by using the term, using the idea of the strap, even if the term srochnal doesn't appear in the Gemara, that it seems to be that they're thinking about our story. And I'm curious what people feel like the connection is. I'm not sure there's like a direct connection, but I think that there's something there that I want to talk about in our takeaway section. But before we actually get there, does anyone think they have any like preliminary ideas of maybe what the connection between the king's story and then this story is? What new lens maybe do we have on that story that maybe we didn't have before? Yes, Nathan.
I mean, based on what I'm seeing here, it seems like an assimilation thing, like the shoelaces representing, the the divide, like the smallest unit that divides Jewish people and those who are not Jewish. And if that's the case, then the story of Lot, the story of Abraham and Sodom and Lot, like it's less so about Abraham being worried about what people will say, but more so I think about like a sense of indebtedness to the king of Sodom and where that can lead. Like we talk about this in terms of kashrut, or at least I've heard about kashrut in this manner. Like a lot of the mixing of Jews and non-Jews and kashrut, people are all worried. It's not about the food in and of itself, less so of a worry about if a food is kosher, and more so about perhaps an indebtedness that will lead to, a concern of assimilation. So I think I'm seeing that here.
Yeah, right. That it's a little thing, like a little shoe strap, but that the symbolism of what that could mean, right? That when saying, "Oh, it is I that made Abraham rich," like that potential new connection that bonds Avram and the king of Sodom, and where that could lead. Like maybe it's good to have, partners and ties to different groups, but that there seems to be something that's dangerous to the new covenant that Avram just took on by having this kind of connection. Yeah, totally. Does anyone else have any other ideas? Awesome. We can take it to the last part and see if that percolates anything.
Just incidentally, like it seems like Rashi is sort of watering down this, you're supposed to transgress for even minor things. It seems like the criteria of the minor thing is that it has to involve some sort of, Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of God's name, or Chilul Hashem. But let's say if this was in your private house and no one would know about it, it sounds like then indeed you wouldn't. You would transgress something like this. So interesting that he's sort of qualified it in that way.
Right, that it's a signaling to other Jews thing. And so I think that's actually a really good tie into these last two sources. Well, particularly the last one. This is the takeaway that I want to have is the dangers of Sodom, which I guess, that might be like not so surprising that Sodom is bad news, but it's about what exactly is wrong with Sodom and maybe what we're picking up on here. So first, I have a very interesting source from Masechet Chulin that I think actually addresses what Nathan was talking about very well, where we have the explicit quote from Bereshit that I will not take a thread or a shoe strap or anything of yours, distancing himself from anything not rightfully his. So by Abraham not taking those things, since they weren't really his children, i.e. us, merited 2 mitzvot. We gained 2 mitzvot as a reward from this. And what were they? The thread of blue sky wool worn on ritual fringes and the strap of phylacteries. which is fascinating. But I feel like those things, having the blue fringe inside on your tzitzit, and then also wrapping tefillin, those are like very public mitzvot. Those are mitzvot that we're signaling to other people, like, oh yes, like I am observant in this way. And I wonder if that might be like why those things are connected. And also they're all like strings. so that also would make sense, string oriented things, whether it be the tzitzit fringe or it would be the leather strap, that those might be connected to the shoe aspect. So I thought that was interesting to point out, like focusing on the nature of this public and private, and what do we signal to other people point. So definitely that. Yes, yeah, exactly. The visible symbols and signals of Judaism. And then the last source that I have here is from Pirkei Avot, and some of you might be familiar with it, where we talk about different kinds of ways that we relate to our things and other people's things, and how Sdom gets involved. And maybe this can help us understand how to map it back onto our story. So, Arba Midot Ba'adam, there are 4 types of characters in human beings. Ha'omer shali shali v'shalcha shalcha, zo midah benonit. Someone who says, mine is mine, yours is yours, we don't have to intermingle in this way. That is a commonplace type. V'yeshomrim zo midat Sdom. So that's what's really fascinating about this, is that it could seem like a seemingly neutral statement. It's not someone who's like overly generous and saying, what is mine is mine. So what is yours, and what is mine is yours. It's not someone who's giving, but it's also not someone who's like taking everything. And yet something that could be seemingly neutral, some are saying that actually that is the way of Sdom, which is fascinating. And that seems to be not so great, because Sdom ends up being destroyed. Something that's seemingly neutral all of a sudden has a potential to spiral into something that is bad. All the other ones are interesting, but I don't think necessarily interesting for us today. So this is what I'm going to focus on. And what I want to suggest is, in light of everything that we saw, the danger of neutrality, of doing something and then not realizing its potential snowball effect, might be the true danger of this story, and what like Avram was picking up on by not offering the shoelace, the potential symbolism of even taking those little things, not recognizing that they could have huge ramifications for the nature of Avram's relationship with God by getting Mel Sdom in the way. And that being neutral and saying, you know what, like I'll just take the booty, like why not? It's not mine. And it's not anyone else's. That's probably too neutral. And like the danger of being neutral is actually, being a bystander is not really not doing anything. It's still actually taking a stance. The idea that neutrality is still a stance, which is like kind of ironic. But I think that might be part of the argument, that there's no such thing as a not proactive move. And that if we think that we are being neutral, that we should be thinking otherwise, that maybe this is the pitch, by kind of tying all of these stories together. So that's what I hope to gain out of it, that this story that might just seem kind of silly, that Avram is feeling kind of defensive about Mel Sdom. As we point out earlier, like Mel Sdom just assumes that all of the stuff is his, which is not a great midah, not a great way to act. And Avram could have just said, whatever, like it's fine. It's not really like the biggest deal. By Avram taking a stance, even with something like a shoe strap, now that we've seen how powerful the shoe strap is, hopefully we can understand this story as a play against neutrality, and saying that even at a time like this, and even for something as little as that, it's important for us to be taking a stand. That's my takeaway. If anyone else has any comments or thoughts or questions to kind of tie everything up together, I'd love to hear. And if not, have a good night. Yeah, Barry.
I like what you said. It doesn't particularly add anything for me from what I was thinking back in the beginning of the conversation about not wanting to distance Avram, wanting to distance himself from the king of Sodom, and just not have anything to do with his people, his booty, his possessions, and except for Lot. And I believe that the decree against Sodom has not yet been issued. So I think Amram, if he has any kind of foresight, and I believe he does, I think Sarah has more. I think Sarah, whoever she is at this point, has more or better We learned that when they went down to Egypt, I think, in Rashi commentary. So I think that Avram has a sense that Sodom is on the brink and not a place to be stayed away from and to see what happens at best. Maybe they have still time to do tshuva because the decree hasn't been enacted yet. Like you say, it comes after this. In the storytelling, I'm not, because we don't know what's chronological in Torah, but it's Avram, I think, just is not willing to play his hand, other than he's on God's side and nobody else's, and that's where he goes. Even Lot, which there's commentary that I read, I think by now, but when Lot and Avram actually make the split, hey, this territory is not big enough for both of us. You pick your side. Lot, go to the right, I'll go to the left. Lot, go to the left, I'll go to the right. Avram makes his stand, watches Lot go, and just his concern is that he respected Lot and discharges his responsibility to his family, especially after Lot kept his mouth shut about Avram being Avram being the brother, or and not the husband of Sarai in the sojourn to Egypt. And that's another fun story in itself, and it also colors Avram's character to be practical when he thinks he has to be practical. There was less than a righteous moment when I read it, and yet I'm not the guy to criticize Glass House, but yet Avram, he has his human moments, and his superstitions and his worries. So I'm still back at the beginning of the story as opposed to the extension. The symbols have something to do. I'm not sure they added to my view of this story.
I definitely hear. I will say, to push back a little bit, is
Sure.
It could be that, that they were prophetic and so they sensed that there was something wrong. But I think Leia's question at the beginning of like, well, what exactly, like, was it that they were idol worshippers? Like, we don't actually know what's wrong with them yet. And I think that it is helpful to say, like, they're bad news, but how exactly are they bad news? I think that that's the best way for us to be thinking, how do we become better people? If we just say someone's bad, but we don't actually articulate what the problem is, there's not really a way for us to be learning how to work on our own sense of selves. So I definitely like it's easy to say, like, well, I remember it was not good, but I think specifying what exactly the problem was, I do think that there's something helpful to that. But I agree with you, it's not the same kind of like revealing a layer of the story, like reading a whole backstory that we didn't have necessarily before. But I do think it provides a different kind of ethical dimension that I think is fascinating. But you don't have to like it, and that's also fine.
It comes later, I think, but not yet. You're right. I acknowledge what you're saying. Yeah, we learn later. Sexual depravity hurts. Oh, wow.
Yeah. Amazing. Did anyone else have anything they want to share?
Nothing other than thank you.
Thank you, Ruth.
Amazing. Everybody.
Awesome. Well, on that note, hope everyone enjoyed, and hopefully see some of you next week. There's lots to talk about in Parsha Vayera, so I'm looking forward to being with some of you here. And yeah, thank you so much, Leah, and thank you so much for spending a weeknight learning Torah with me.
Yashikach.
Great class. Great class. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Have a good night. Bye.
Thank you.